Hello everyone. So it's the start of a new weekend, and today we are going to cover some popular Munstag interview questions. Now, basically, these are the questions which I have actually faced in my previous interviews, and I'm going to just share answers for them. They were asked frequently by a lot of employers when I was looking forward for jobs. So I hope some of the answers of these questions help you all too. So without further ado, let's start off with the popular Munstag interview question series. So we are first going to cover front-end questions in our first part of our series, and in the second part we are going to cover the back-end questions because Munstack basically covers Mongo Express, React, and Node. From that, a lot of questions are asked in web development domain, like in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Then questions are asked on React, and then questions are asked on backend, like on Node and MongoDB. So today I'm going to cover basically the questions asked in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Then in part 2, we'll cover questions on React, and in part 3, we'll cover questions on Node, I think. So let's start off with the questions on front end. Now, usually the interview starts off with basic questions like what are web development basics, how do you structure your page, and some questions on HTML, CSS. Now, a few questions which are asked frequently are what are the new elements added in HTML5? So I'm going to cover a few tags which are added in HTML5, which are newer ones and which are quite useful. So let's start off with a simple code pen. Now, the first tag which we can cover are all the input elements, like the new input elements which were introduced in HTML5. The first input element which was introduced recently was color picker. So you have, once you save your input tag with a type color, you will have a color picker like this, and you can select a color. Now, in order to get the value which is selected, like once a user selects it, you can have a function like on change, and you can write a or pass a function here. For example, let's say we have a function which is supposed to print selected color by the user, and then pass the context like is the this keyword, because it doesn't work without that directly. Now, once you have a function written like this, you can define the function and make some changes. So let's have a function here in which we pass the value of context. And what we can do is first we can log the value just to check the value passed by color picker. So the value is passed in context dot value, like the input param dot value keyword, and we can hit save. Now if we go to the console tab, and let me just clear the tab as well. So if I pick, okay, there is issue here. We haven't defined a function here. So let's define a function and hit clear. Now if I pick a color from this tab, so let's pick, I don't know, blue color, and select or click on the web page, we get a value passed and a color value. Next thing is just to show the user the value, we can just have a simple alert, which is like your selected color is, and the context dot value which we have here, we can print that as well. So it's save. We can clear the console again, and once a user selects any kind of value here and clicks on the page, okay, the value, okay, the comma cannot work in alerts, we need plus sign. Now let me just save and repeat the process again. If I select some kind of value here and click on the tab, as you can see, we have the X color code. So this is called as X color code. If you type X to RGB, you will get your color code back. So there are a lot of converters like that, and you can check the color code as well. So that's basically how HTML5 color picker works using input tag. Now let me just comment out this code and proceed ahead with the next input. So another input which we have is, I think, date picker. So if I type input type as date, you will get a syntax like this. So let me just close the console, And if you click on this calendar tab here, you can select any kind of date that you want, and that date will get reflected in the date figure. Again, in on-change handler, you can handle the date value and take it in your code. Another input which we have is email. So if you assign a type as email to a value, and if you type some name, the email validation will work internally. And if I bring my mouse here, as you can see, we will get a like a dialog. If you can see here, please input @ and if you have some kind of code like this, then it will ask for .com as well. So this is how you can have a email validation, and once on clicking on submit, this type email checks for the validation and prints a box to the user. Now the next input that was introduced in HTML5 was number. So you can have a like restrict the user input to a numeric value only using number tab, and using plus minus you can increment and decrement. Now there are a lot of other input values which you can check out. These are just some of them. Then other than that, we had other elements as well. Some of the elements which were introduced, which were media related elements in HTML. So let's just cover a few media elements. One element which was added by the HTML community team was video tag. Now video tag is especially useful if you want to display a basic video player in your page without writing a lot of code. So previously this was handled using /player, but with the addition of a video tag, that got handled easily. So I have a video here from Pixels. So this is the video which I am going to use. So this is a free copyright free video. I have uploaded this video to Cloudinary, so that I have like a URL. Let me just open that URL here. So this is the URL which I have. So I am just going to copy the URL and use it in my video tag. So if I type a video tag here with src attribute, so src is for the src URL, and then we can set the controls as well, is equal to true, and let's give it a width of, I don't know, around 200 px, and hit save. So as you can see, we have a small video player here, and let's give it a width of 300 px, and once you click on the play button, the video will start playing. So that is basically how you can have a video, like a video player in your code. So you can go full screen and other stuff as well. So these are our built-in controls which are present in video player. We just have to pass controls is equal to true in our video tag. Similarly, we have audio tag as well, which you can go through. Then there were some miscellaneous tags as well, like a progress bar. So let me just add a div here. So a progress bar can have a value or a max value. So if we don't set any kind of value and just show a progress, it will show a loading indicator like this. Now if I want to set a specific value, in that case I can set a max value to, let's say, 10, and then the current value using value keyword. So let's say if I add a value as 1, the progress bar will show the value. So let's keep it a value at 10, and max value is 100%. So in case of 100%, as you can see, the 10% value will get reflected. If we change this to 50, the progress should get uploaded to the half of the value. So these are some of the like miscellaneous or interesting elements introduced in HTML5. Other than that, we have some other elements as well. Like if you want to define the header of a site, we have the header tag. So you can have a header tag at the site header, and you can specify all the elements at the top of the page as well. Then we have a nav, by which you can build a navigation bar at the top. I'm not going to build a nav, but these are some of the tags by which you can build the elements at the top of the site. So yeah, those are some of the elements. Then we have footer, then we have article, and a lot of HTML tags as well. So HTML5 tags. So you can showcase those to the interviewer in case you need to, if you want to show all those elements. So before I proceed ahead, I just want to comment out the code. So let me just comment out all this code here. And let's move on to our next part of our series. I think the comment is not okay. The comment is closed properly now, so we can proceed ahead to the next question in this series, which is different ways to center a div in CSS. So let's say you have a div, a basic div with a class, let's say uh, element block, let's say. And just to show this div, I'm going to copy this element block class. I'm going to add a width and height to this element. So let's say this div has a width of 200 px, height of 100 pixels, then a background color. So a background color of, let's say, light blue, and border 1 px solid, and uh, let's give it a color of cyan. So let's say I have a div like this. Coral will be better. Okay. So let's say I have a div like this with some border and I want to center it. So that's what examiners ask. Now we can have a class here, let's say center class, and I am supposed to write some code here by which the divs get centered. The first way in which you can horizontally center a div is using margin auto, so that div will get horizontally centered. But if interviewer asks that he wants the div to be centered horizontally as well as vertically, then in that case there are three different ways in which centering occurs. There are a lot of ways, out of which three were popularly used in HTML code. So before that, let me just add a parent element to this div. So we have a element container, let's say, and the properties which we are going to apply are going to be applied to the parent container. So the first way in which you can center this div is, so let me just switch the center class to the parent element. So the popular way which was used before new CSS properties were introduced was using transform translate. Let me just showcase that method. So for that you specify the position of the div as absolute. Then you apply a 50% top spacing and 50% from left. So the div is somewhere at the center but not at exactly center. Now to bring the div to exact center, we use a property called as transform. And in transform, we specify a translate property within which we specify negative 50% on x and y axis. So that basically centers the div. So this was the earliest known method which was popularly used for centering an element. This is not currently used widely. The method which was used widely after introduction of flexbox was using display flex. So let me just showcase that. For that, the element container should have a height of 100%, without which the element won't get centered vertically. So let's give it a height of 100 vh. Now after that, if I want to center my div, what we used to do is just to specify a display property as flex, then justify content is a property which we used to use and which to set the property as center. Once I have justify content center, the div is centered horizontally. Now in order to center the div vertically, we used align content, align items property to center, and by that the div gets centered vertically. Now this was a popular way of centering divs like till 2018. After that we had introduction of grid system. So after grid system was introduced, there is a simpler property, like we don't have to use three different properties, or in this case 4 different properties to center a div. We can do it using just 2 properties. So for that we go for a display as grid, and then we use a property called as place items, and we have a value as center. So this is the most shortest or the least CSS properties way by which you can center a div using display grid and place item center. So yeah, these are the three ways by which you can center an element using CSS. I hope that was useful as well. Let me just comment it out before we proceed ahead to the next question. So those are the three ways by which you can center a div using CSS. Then we move over to JavaScript questions. Now JavaScript may we usually have questions like the concept of scopes, then variable data types, what is the difference between undefined and null. So these are some of the popular questions, but these are answerable easily. The question which is quite like students find difficult is what are closures in JavaScript, and give an example of closure in JavaScript. So as you can see, the definition of closures is closures are basically nested functions which are able to preserve the data. Now, usually interviewers ask the definition along with an example. So a good example for this, like the most basic examples for this is on W3 schools. I'm just going to showcase that here. So let's say I want to explain closure using an example. So this is what I can showcase. So let's say I have a function which is supposed to increment some values. And within that I have, let me just correct the, okay. So let's say I have a variable, let's say a number, whose initial value is 1. Then as I mentioned, like closures are nested functions with preserved data. So this variable is, let's say, the preserved data, and closures usually return a nested function. So let's say I have an increment function, then there will be a nested function which is returned by this external function. So for that we need to return some function. So let's say I have a return statement with a function here within which this number is incremented by a value of, let's say, 1. And then we can write a code to print the updated value. So we can write the current value of number is colon comma the number value. Okay. Once I have this function, as you can see, this function is itself returning a function. So if I have a instance of this function, like let's say const num, or instance of functions, let's say, which is increment. So this is my function definition, and now I am calling the function. And if I try to log the instance or this function instance using console.log, so instance value, let's say, and if we log this value here, let's go to console and let's clear. So this is what we get. So basically this increment function is returning this function, right? So the value that we have in this variable is the return function itself, which is the function which is supposed to increment the value. So I think we can rename this to something like, let's say, add. Now if I call this add function once and I hit save, let me just clear the console. And as you can see, the output that we get is the current value of number is 2. How did this happen? The value was 1 and number was incremented by a value of 1. That is why the current value was printed as 2. Like, this is where things are simpler. Now the part where things get complicated is when I call this add function again. Once I call my add function again and hit save, so my expected value will be 2. But if you see here, now this was the previous output, so currently this is what we get. So the value of the number was 2 when this add function was called, and after my add function was called again, the value got changed to 3 instead of 2. So how did that happen is, this number variable which we have here, its value did not get ended or did not run out or did not get reset once the function call was completed in this case. So once this add function was called, this value which was incremented to got preserved, and next time when the add function was called, that value got incremented by a factor of 1 and the value got incremented to 2. So if I call this function again on the third time and if I hit save, So the console output, as you can see, first was 2, then it gets added to 3, then it gets updated to 4. So this is basically what closure means. So we have a internal variable whose value is preserved, and it returns a function which is acting on this preserved value in some way. In this case, this value was incremented by 1. So this value got preserved even when the function scope was complete or the call was complete, and on subsequent calls the value remains, or the value which was incremented remains in the scope, and it gets incremented after each call. So that is a basic example of closure which you can give to your interviewer. Now there are all possible practical examples as well, but this is the most simplest example by which you can explain a closure to your interviewer. So that is what closures are in JavaScript. Now, another question which interviewers might or might not ask is, what is function currying? So currying is basically like a variation of closure, which you can explore as well. So function currying is basically a way to transform a function. So let's say I have a function which is supposed to add three values. Let's say A, B, and C, and you are just returning some of these values. So we are returning. Let me just close the console for some time. uh, you are just returning some of these three values, and the way to call this function is you can just log this output. So console.log and call the function here with some value, let's say 1, 2, 3. Now if we go to the console, we will have some values printed here. So let me just clear it and save. So as you can see, the output that we get is addition of these three numbers, which is 6. Now this is the easier way to handle addition, but there were some people who wanted to make our life difficult, and they wanted to have some fancy way of doing this. That is why currying was introduced. So in case of currying, what we can do is, instead of adding these functions like this or having a function addition like this, another I don't know if it is elegant or whatever kind of ways. So we have an instance which is, let's say, adder, which contains the first value, let's say the value C. Then we have a return with a function which takes the value B. Then within that we have another return, I don't know why, with element A, and then you return the sum, which is A plus B plus C. Why did we do it? I don't know. But that is how function currying apparently works. So the way to use this function is, first you create a instance 1, which is supposed to call the external adder function. So I'm just going to explain the instances first. So let's say you pass a third value, which is, let's say, 3 first, and you log the instance 1 value first using console.log. Okay. And if we go to the console, this is what we get. We get a function which is function B with a return function A. Basically, the adder function now has this return function, or this is the value which we get returned when we call the adder function. Now let's say I have an instance 2, which is calling instance 1 function, and we pass a value 2 to it. Then let's log the instance 2 as well. So if I log my instance 2 here and it's save, and let me just clear this and it's save here. Now the first instance returned the outer function, second instance returned my internal function. Now if I actually want to do the addition, I will call this uh, inner function here, which is instance 2 with another value, let's say 1. Finally I will get my, which is instance 3. Now if I clear the console, hit save, Hopefully the instance 6 or instance 3 will print my value 6. Now the alternate way of calling this function, like instead of calling instance 1, instance 2 and instance 3, we can call this function directly, which is adder function, in an alternate way, and that is the main way in which function calling calls actually execute. So what we can do is we can go for a console.log here, and we can call our adder function. Instead of passing the values thrice like this, what we can do is we can pass the value 3 first, then add another circular brackets, pass the value 2, and another set of circular brackets and pass the value 1. And if I print to something like result of addition is comma the adder function, and if I go to my console, as you can see the value 6 got printed again. So this is the second variation in which you can print the values, and this is basically what function calling means. So you have uh, like a function call in which you pass the arguments in circular brackets, and the nested function calls execute them in one by one. That is, this first value 3 is mapped to the value c, this second value 2 is mapped to the value b, and this one value is mapped to the value a. Like in each nested call, the parameters are taken in the sequence in which we are passed in this circular brackets. And one of the useful cases of using function calling is higher order functions. Like in case of React, we have higher order functions. There we use this kind of syntax. Then in Redux, I think we have a good example of function calling like this. So yeah, there are some practical applications of function calling, but the most basic example that you can find is this one. Function calling is basically a mechanism to transform a function. So if you search for function calling in JavaScript, you will have a fancy kind of definition here, which is a technique of evaluating function with multiple arguments into sequence of function. I don't know. Way to transform a function. That's it. That we know. So yeah, some people ask what is calling as well. That is why I covered that. Call apply bind is used or asked a lot of times in JavaScript interviews. So let me just cover that as well. So let's say I have JSON here, which is Mario character. So Mario was a game which we used to play in our childhood. So let's say I have a name of this Mario character, which is Mario. Then let's say the Mario character is currently on level 1. And I have a function which is update level function, which is supposed to increment the current level of Mario. So I have a function here, and this function is supposed to increment this current value. Now how do I increment the value within the JSON itself? For that we used a concept of this. So let me just log the concept or the value of this before I move ahead. So if I log my value this, and if I call my Mario character dot update level like this, if I go to the console, let me just clear the console first and save. Now if we get the output, as you can see in this the brand, the value which is printed here, this contains the value name and current level here. So by using the this keyword, I can access this current level, right? So what I can do is I can write a function like this, which is supposed to increment the value, like this dot current level is equal to this dot current level plus 1. So let's say I have a function like this. Now before we proceed ahead, let's just log some values. So let's say I have a value before update log. Here we are printing Mario character dot current level. Then we run our update level function. So we write Mario character dot update level. Then we log the value after update. And if we go back to our console, let me just clear all the values and save. Okay, let's just remove this console as well. Hit save. And as you can see, the value before update was 1 and the value after update changes to 2. So let's say this is a basic call. Now, one way in which you can call a function in JavaScript is, instead of using this curly bracket, you can go for a call method like this. And if I hit save, even then my output will remain unchanged and I will get this same output. As you can see, this was a normal function call output, and this is using dot, like after using the dot call method, right? So these are two ways in which you can like call a function. Now, okay, the value did not get updated, that is okay, but this function got executed as well. So these are the two ways in which you can call a function in JavaScript. Now, what we can do is, I think after passing this, the value will get updated properly, hopefully. Okay, it did not get incremented. Okay. So another way, or now let's say I have another character here, which is Luigi character. So the name of this character is Luigi, and let's say the current level of Luigi character is 1. And I'm going to just print the same statements again using console.log. So we have value before update. So we have Luigi character dot current level printed here. And I have another console.log statement in which we are going to print the value after update. Now, let's say I don't want to write this update level function again. That is, I want to use the update level function from Mario character to update the level of Luigi character as well. How do I do that? So for that, what I can do is I can call the Mario character function using Mario character dot update level, and I can use the call keyword here instead of calling that function directly, and I can pass the Luigi character instance. Okay. Now if I go to my console, let me just clear the console and hit save. As you can see, now the value of Luigi, which was current level 2, got updated to, sorry, the value which was at 1 got updated to 2. If the value was at 2, and if I hit save, now the value before update is 2 and that got updated to 3. So this is how you can update the value of Mario character as well. Now if I want to call my Mario character, like the Mario character instance, I can go for a call like this. Now if I hit save and click here and hit save again. Okay. So as you can see, my value got changed to 2 from 1 using my update level function. Okay, that was a mistake. So let's just check again. Now as you can see, the value got updated in case of Mario character as well from 1 to 2. So that is basically how you can use call method to call your characters. Now another way in which you can use this Mario character function call to update the value of Luigi, so is using apply method. So let me just comment out this code. And the another way is to use apply keyword here instead of call. Now if I hit save, clear the console and hit save, as you can see the value gets updated. Now the question that comes to our mind is what is the difference between call and apply? So in case of call and apply, the difference is how we pass the values. So let's say in this update level function, I have to pass a value here. Let's say index value. and the current level should be incremented by this index values. So if I have to do that using call method, what I will do is I will pass the value directly after the character. Let's say I want to increment the value by 2. Let me just clear the console and hit save. So the current level before update was 2, and as you can see, this element which was passed, which was value 2, this got added to the current level and the value got updated to 4. Now if I want to make these changes using apply, the difference is we don't use a comma like the value directly, but we pass the value in an array. So this is how the value needs to be passed in case of apply method. So the output remains unchanged, but in case of apply, we pass the value in form of array. In case of the call method, we pass the value as single instance. So that is the difference between call and apply. Now the third keyword which we need to understand is bind. So in case of bind, if I go for a function call like this, which is using bind method, and if it's clear and if it's safe, as you can see, the value remains unchanged. That the reason for this is bind does not make the function call directly. So if you are using the bind method to make a function call, you will have, it will return an instance. So let's say I have an instance here of my bind method. Now if I call this instance method, or let's just log the instance first and check what we get. Console.log instance value. Let's save. Let me just clear the console. So as you can see, I get returned, I get a function in return. Now if I call this function using regular function call, save. Let me just clear the console. Now as you can see, the value gets incremented to 4. So in case of bind, instance of function is returned and the function is not called directly. So that is the difference between the function execution between call, apply and bind. So in case of call method, the value is passed directly. In case of apply, the value is passed as array. In case of bind, we get an instance, and we need to make a function call of that instance to run this code. Now the example that you saw here, this was taken from another YouTube video, which was from CodeWithSimran YouTube channel. I will share the link, like the original example which she had made. So that was the simplest possible example I could find on the internet. I just modified it a bit. So I will share the original video of CodeWithSimran channel, which covers call apply and bind beautifully, and from which you can understand the concept of call apply bind as well. I will share it in the description. So that is how call apply bind works in JavaScript. I hope you got the gist of how it works. You can obviously refer to online resources for understanding it in detail. And that brings us to the end of the part 1 in this series, which was focused on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In the next part, we are going to focus on the questions on React.js, Node.js, and MongoDB as well. So that will be covered in part 2. Hope you found the part 1 of this tutorial useful. I will cover the second part soon. A lot of my own students asked the interview questions as well, so I made a video instead of answering each one of them. So I hope you all get the use of this as well. If you like this video, please subscribe and like the video as well. That motivates me to keep adding new content on my channel. And thank you and have a nice day. Goodbye.